Hello and welcome to the Three Questions podcast, where we dive deep into the world of wealth management and connect you with industry experts. I'm your host, Wayne Baxter, Senior Executive Manager at One Capital Management. Now, the U.S. federal election results are in, and Donald J. Trump will be inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States. According to the latest vote counts, Kamala Harris ended up with around 72.4 million votes. That's compared to Trump's 75.6 million votes. And of those 72.4 million voters, including celebrities such as Whoopi Goldberg, Bryan Cranston, have stated that they would move to Canada if Trump won the election. Well, here we are, post-US election. And if you're thinking of moving to Canada, you will not want to miss today's episode. We're going to address the three questions to ask about immigrating to Canada. Thank you for taking time to check us out. And if you enjoy this episode of the Three Questions podcast, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our podcast and YouTube channels. Okay, now I've noticed a bit of a trend since moving here to the US in 2012. Without fail, around election time, I will start to get calls from American citizens asking about moving to Canada. And this most recent election cycle has been no different. In fact, I would say there's been a bit of an uptick in a number of individuals who've reached out to me, even throughout the year and recently. But how many of those who say they're going to move to Canada are really going to do it? And even if they wanted to, can they? So who better to address the topic today, three questions to ask about immigrating to Canada, than today's special guest. Joining us once again is Catherine Sas. Catherine is a Vancouver, British Columbia-based immigration attorney with Sas Ing Immigration Law Center. Catherine provides a full range of immigration services and is consistently recognized as a leading immigration practitioner. Easy for me to say. Now get this, Catherine has been voted Vancouver's best immigration attorney lawyer, as they call it in Canada, 10 years in a row. 10 years in a row. Catherine, great to see you again. And I got to tell you, I mean, those are like Gretzky-like numbers. 10 years in a row? That's pretty impressive.
Thank you very much, Wayne. It's really nice to be with you again.
Yes, well, who better to have on the Three Questions podcast to talk about, we're going to call this the post-election special. I mentioned in the opening that I've heard from a number of Americans who have expressed interest in moving to Canada, and I'm pretty sure you have as well. I mean, I'm not alone here.
No, you're not. In all fairness, this is not a new reality. While we call it the Trump effect, and there was a big Trump effect in 2016. In fact, the night of or the morning after the election, the demand and interest from Americans broke our computer system. There were so many inquiries. I think either two things happen. I think either people have become a little bit inured to what they're facing, or Canada fixed its computer system, but we didn't have it crash in November. But in addition to Mr. Trump, this is not a new reality. There was the Bush effect, the 9/11 effect, the Obama effect. You have a very, very polarized, politicalized community. And whenever there's a change in the weather, some people look about moving to a different climate. So, and that's when Canada becomes attractive. So yes, there has been an increase in inquiries in the last 2 weeks, and some hard discussions with people. And some of these people, I may refer indirectly to them, I've been in touch with over the years, and it's a little bit more challenging now than it was before.
Well, I got to say this as a Canadian, and I have a lot of friends down here in the United States who I've come to know and love, but I must say, I think it's a little presumptuous for some of these folks out here to think that Canada is just going to welcome them with open arms because, well, we're Americans. What's the big deal? And I say that myself, having gone the other way, going from Canada to the United States, having gone through the process of immigrating here to the US, and in doing so requiring the services of not one, not two, ultimately three immigration attorneys, applying for multiple visas for me and my family, before eventually, qualifying for a green card and then finally becoming a U.S. citizen just over a year ago. So, I just want to make that comment. Our discussion today is really going to be about the three questions to ask about immigrating to Canada. And again, Catherine Sas, why don't we get right to our questions here? So, question number one. Is it possible, and again, these are coming from the perspective of an American citizen living in the United States looking to immigrate to Canada. So question number one, is it possible for me to immigrate to Canada?
Maybe. As I alluded to a little bit earlier, it's more difficult than it has been in the past. Mm-hmm. There is no retiree program. I just had a conversation with a retired American couple this morning who were on the verge of signing a 6-month lease agreement in Vancouver. And I said, well, hold your horses. You're not going to be able to waltz up here, and you're not going to be able to qualify as permanent resident. You might be able to purchase a seasonal resident and come back and forth. So you have to ask, what is your purpose? What are you looking to do? Many Americans will come up and say, I want to move here. And then when they find out what they have to do, they change their mind. So I think the first thing you need to do is determine, are you eligible? Is there a program that fits your reality? It's more difficult now than it's ever been in my almost 35-year career. So it's a very different environment. Canada's business programs for business people, very tough, very tough. In April of this year, our business programs were severely curtailed, and one has been frozen until the end of 2026. That is the self-employed program. And I used to bring in a lot of people from the United States through the self-employed category, which applied to professional athletes and people in cultural activities, actors, directors, writers. And that program is now closed. One of the people that I met with last year has been a longstanding client of mine that didn't move in the past and now wants to move. And I'm saying, well, we're going to have to wait until the end of 2026 to see what your options are. You can come on a temporary basis. And that's a good strategy for people to consider. Come as a worker, come as a business person on an intercompany transferee permit, establish your own business here, come as an international student. And while you're here on your temporary status, whether it be for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years, transition to permanent resident status. So you really need to have a preliminary determination or assessment with your unique circumstances to determine what options are open to you if you really want to move to Canada.
Okay, this opens up a Pandora's, I knew this was going to happen. This opens up a Pandora's box of questions. So first things first, correct me if I'm wrong here, and I'm sure you won't have any trouble doing that. Canada has been welcoming upwards, if not more than 400,000 new permanent residents annually. I just heard something yesterday that those numbers may even be decreased. How is all that going to influence the new application process?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And yes, you are more or less correct on your levels. In the last 10 years, from 2017 to the projected levels for 2027, Canada went from welcoming, for about 2 decades before 2017, approximately 250,000 immigrants a year. Okay. Right. The levels for 2026 and for 2027 were 500,000 immigrants. Actually, no, I'm wrong. For 2025, for next year and 2026, they were 500,000 immigrants. The 2027 levels hadn't been determined. So in a 10-year period, we went from 250,000 immigrants a year to 500,000. We have bit of an oversupply right now, and I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. That's what I call the COVID effect. But this past end of October, the minister introduced our new immigration levels, and they are reducing permanent immigration by 20%. So that is going to affect people from outside. that have not yet come to Canada. So you're going to have to, as I said, develop probably a temporary strategy, or unless you're one of the select few that are able to qualify under Canada's Express Entry program. So it's just going to take some work to see how you are going to fit in, and you are going to need to determine what's the best way for you to come. Now, why did we get to the place that we're at? And I think this is what I describe as the COVID effect. The world shut down on March 15th, 2020. And it shut down our government.
Yes,
but it did not shut down the intake of immigration applicants, both permanent and temporary. And we already had a lot of temporary people here. And many of those temporary people were allowed to do things that they would never have been able to do before. Students who were only permitted to work 20 hours a week were now permitted to work 40 hours a week because we had a diminished workforce. People who were in Canada on visitor status were able to apply for work permits, which we've never, ever been able to do. And with that, when you all of a sudden are able to work here and stay here and live here for 3 and 4 and 5 years, you kind of get attached to a place and you want to be able to stay. So we now have a big pool of people inside the country that we have to try and normalize. So I think what we're trying to do is somewhat diminish the intake of new temporary people, include the intake of permanent residents through the programs that we have here. But really, there's a new in Canada focus category that's going to try to transition the current people in Canada from temporary status to permanent status. But our Prime Minister has been talking about this a lot. This transition period is meant to endure through 2025 and 2026. And hopefully we will be able to process enough people that by the time 2027 rolls by, we'll be able to open up the gates again. And by the way, I think it's important to note when we talk about reducing the levels, I mentioned that we went from 250 to 500. That's 100% increase.
Yeah, double.
The reductions are taking us to 395,000 for next year, 385,000 for 2026, and 365,000. So still more than 100,000 immigrants than we were welcoming in 2015 are going to be processed. So there's still pretty healthy levels.
Okay.
But, it's not for the faint of heart, and you need to see how you can qualify and then determine what am I willing to do to qualify.
Yeah, which is what you're so clever. So we're going to get into question number 2 here. And what I love about our conversations is that you have this incredible ability to respond in such a way that you invoke additional questions. And I think today is the same thing. Okay, so question number 2, as you were alluding to. Question number 2, what do I have to do in order to immigrate to Canada? So we've talked about how it isn't as easy as it used to be. The government has actually moved the levels up. You said doubled them. Now they're pulling them back down. That suggests that it's certainly not going to be any easier. So let's talk about what do I have to do? And I've already thought of a follow-up question because I have a specific case in mind that has a bit of a twist here. So I can't wait to hear your response.
Well, as I said, firstly, we need to determine if and how you will qualify. And we need to develop a strategy. Assuming that we can find a path that's going to lead you to your immigration goal, whether it's temporary to permanent or permanent right off the bat, there is going to be preparation required. For example, if you apply to immigrate under the Express Entry program, I can't even calculate what your point scores are going to be unless I have a language test. I don't care if you're a professor from Harvard or Yale or Stanford, you are going to have to take a language test. You are going to have obtain an educational credential assessment, or ECA. That is a third-party neutral assessment by an academic institution that evaluates your educational credential to see how it relates to a Canadian credential, because on the global scale, not all educational credentials are considered equal.
Mm-hmm.
So language tests, ECAs, you need reference letters.
Before you go on to the reference letter, I want to ask a question. I'm going to clarify that one.
Yep.
So do professional designate, you talk about education, I think, BA, PhD, MBA. So do professional designations fall into that category as well?
No, that's a really good question. You still have to, you will use your license to be licensed here, but it's the way the points are scored. They don't get into professional designations. In fact, if you get a work permit under what used to be NAFTA and is now CUSMA, you only need the degree and in some cases show that you've got work experience, and you need to have a job offer in Canada. You do not need to show that you're licensed.
I love the way you called it CUSMA, because down here we call it USMCA. That's pretty good.
Oh.
Good one. I like that one. Well done, Catherine. That's very good. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So professional designations do not equate the same way as, again, university degrees.
Well, they're going to be evaluated by the licensing body. So and licensing is done on a provincial basis in Canada, not on a federal basis. So if you're coming to be a doctor in British Columbia, then you need to have your medical license and registration evaluated, to see if it's on par. I can tell you that there are 5 countries. Let's see if I can get them all. The US, UK, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand don't generally have any problems with being recognized and accepted with other foreign medical credentials. But whether you're in the financial industry, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a nurse, everything has to be assessed. Okay. So going back to reference letters are not straightforward for immigration purposes. And we usually ask for these 3 things right off the bat. Get me your language test, get me your ECA, and get me your letters of reference. Because if we don't have a proper letter of reference, the algorithm that measures whether or not you're going to qualify by Canada Immigration's computerized system can't do its job. And this is meant to take the human decision-making element out of the process and to try and make it easier and faster and cheaper to select which immigrants we want to take. So a reference letter needs to be written by the former employer in accordance with the NOC code. Now, I can tell you that employers in the US and employers in India and China and all around the world, they don't know what the heck the NOC code is. The NOC code is the National Occupational Classification, and every single job is different. I still have in my library the binder of my NOC codes from 2011. It's a binder this thick and, it's fine print. Now it's all computerized. But my point is, there are so many different descriptions. The first one we need to figure out is which NOC code applies to you. And each NOC code is different. Some have 4 specified duties, some have 17. And when your employer is writing your letter of reference, they have to confirm how long you worked, this exact period of time, was it full-time, how many hours a week, and specify the number of duties that you did on a regular day-to-day basis. And when I see people's letters of reference, it often takes us 2 or 3 months of backing and forthing with them and with their former employers to get that reference to be in accordance with express entry. So there are many steps that you have to take. A lot of my American inquiries find it overwhelming at both the effort and at the cost. And it's not just the cost for legal services, it's the cost of all these other steps that they have to take. Yeah.
So if you have multiple employers, like you said, need an employment letter recommendation. So let's say you've been employed by, people tend to move around a bit more now than they used to. So if in the last 10 years, if somebody has been employed by 4 different employers, do they need a letter of reference from each one of them?
It depends what their work experience is, but I would tell somebody to be prepared for yes. In the express entry selection system, they go back 10 years. In some rare situations with clients, we'll go back 15 or 20 years, but that might be a situation where the person is trying to apply as an engineer and they have their engineering work experience that's older than their current work experience, where they may be in more of a computerized capacity or a finance capacity. So it all depends. It's unique for each person, but most of the time we just try and get people to go back 10 years.
Okay, so in the case, the scenario you just we're outlining, it's basically someone who's moving from the United States to Canada because they have a intention of continuing their employment here. That's what I'm gathering from this. But I guess as a follow-up, I have an interesting situation actually of someone I know quite well who is dual citizen, Canadian U.S. citizen, married to a U.S. citizen, and they are of retirement age, and they're seriously considering a move from the U.S. to Vancouver Island. So the fact that, the dual citizen, they're not going to have any trouble whatsoever. What about is the fact that their spouse, who's the American citizen with no Canadian citizenship, is the fact that they are married to a Canadian citizen make it easier for them to relocate, or will that married U.S. citizen spouse have to qualify as an individual?
That is an excellent question. I'm glad for you coming up with a different one. No,
this is 2B. We'll call this question 2B.
Okay. So the steps that I've been explaining, or the programs that I've been explaining, are part and parcel of Canada's economic immigration program,
right, exactly.
which takes about 60% of the immigrants. I think it's up to 63 or 65 now with the most recent levels plan. But the other part of our immigration is the family sponsorship and humanitarian part of it,
right,
including refugees. And so if where you have a Canadian citizen married to an American citizen, the Canadian citizen can sponsor the American's permanent resident citizen, green card holder, whatever. So that is a definite benefit, and there's no change to that program.
All right. Okay. So they're not all of a sudden up against it, but nope. Again, 2C, question 2C.
They are still going to be, you just hold on to 2C. They are still going to be blown away by how many application forms that they have to prepare, the documentation that they have to provide, the amount of effort, the medical exams, the fingerprints, the biometrics, all these various steps in the process, which you're somewhat familiar with.
I'm more than familiar with.
Yeah, and then how long the processing takes. Oh. You know, it's not like you submit the paperwork and you get it tomorrow. It can take months and years. Since COVID, we have sped up for family class spousal sponsorships. Yes.
I will say right now, EB5 is what I think of when you talk about that. I didn't want to go into that. Oh boy. No. Anyway, okay. So question 2C.
Okay.
I love impromptu, but this is what happens when you and I get together. Okay, so that scenario is a Canadian dual citizen who wants to bring their spouse with them to Canada.
Yes.
You know, my clientele, I mean, they're of all demographics, all age groups, from the very young. I mean, I talked to a client earlier today, 88 and a half years old. She is amazing. She is still driving, volunteering, busy person.
Nice.
She's a dual citizen living in Canada, so she's not a part of it. But the point is I have a pretty broad demographic of client. So I'm thinking about the soon-to-be, if not retired couple who are been living in the U.S., who probably watch a lot of U.S. TV, probably too much, and they've been sufficiently spooked to the extent that they say, you know what, I'm out of here. I want to move to Canada.
Yeah.
They're maybe on the verge of retirement or thinking of retiring. The way you're describing this, I know this is maybe a comment, which is maybe should be a question, but I what you're telling me makes me think that it's going to be pretty challenging for them to make a case that would be able to come here, go to Canada.
There is no retired category, and there has been no retired category since the late 80s.
Interesting.
Yes. Now, if it just so
You can
happens that
visit, but
you
you're
can
welcome to
visit,
visit, but
you can visit and you can own property. So if you want to have a seasonal residence, a second home, you can do that. But unless one of them is a Canadian citizen that can sponsor the other spouse, then they're not going to be getting permanent residence.
all right. So this segues perfectly into question number 3. And the question is as follows. Is the current political environment the basis for immigrating to Canada?
Well, it asks its own question. Are we talking about the Canadian political environment or the U.S.
We
political
both know.
environment? Well, we have a pretty, and I'm not just talking about Canada's political environment,
Fair, 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 fair.
the
Okay.
current immigration environment.
Okay.
Okay.
What I was referring to in the question was the U.S. political
Yes.
environment. But if you want to go down another path, we can do that as well. But I mean, this could take an hour to go through that part.
We're not going to go through that. I'm going to stick to the original intention of the question. Is the current U.S. political environment the basis for immigrating to Canada? I suppose that depends upon what your views are. I have members of the LGBTQ community, and they absolutely think it's the basis for moving to Canada, so long as they can qualify. I have Jewish clients that are very concerned about the environment in the United States and want to see what they can do as they perceive Canada to be somewhat safer. So it really depends on what's your motivation. And I would always say that to people, why are you doing this? Having seen in over 30 years that people are always trying to come when there's a change in government, it's 4 years. And I suppose the specter of 8 years is different than the specter of 4 years, but I think you're facing a 4-year specter and not an 8-year specter. So then it's a balancing act. You have to sit there and ask yourself, how much effort am I willing to go through, and how much expense am I going to make? So aside from what you're going to pay me and what you're going to pay for all the other things that you're going to do, and you pay to move your family here, are you going to sell your home in the United States and buy a new home in Canada? As I mentioned, there's a property purchase tax that people have to bear. It's about 20 or 25%. If you're a permanent resident, you don't have to do that. So that's another motivation. But if you're a seasonal resident, that's something somebody may not want to do. So you have to ask, what's your motivation? What's your threshold for facing the various levels and stages and effort required for that period of time? So if your political motivation is your sole motivation, I'm not sure that that's the best idea. If it's going to give you better work opportunities, and for the many, many years, the film and television industry, it was a terrific program for people to come up as a self-employed applicant, because it gave you the opportunity of pursuing work in both the Canadian pool and the American pool. There are a lot of professionals. When the recession hit back in 2007, 2008, there were many Americans who were, and I would say it hit a lot harder in the United States than it hit in Canada. And what was then NAFTA, people could come and get work permits and work here. So you have to ask, what's your motivation for doing it? And if it's just to avoid Trump for 4 years, that may or may not be your best strategy.
Yeah, I look at it from I guess both of us, we have we had to be compassionate and dispassionate at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
When people come to me, I tend to look at it probably a little bit nerdier from a standpoint of the numbers. I realize there's a qualitative and quantitative aspect to all of this, but I think ignorance is bliss and the mother of adventure, one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah.
And I would say, be careful what you wish for, because you might get it in some ways. Yeah. I know these are hot button topics, but I think one of the things you want to think about is taxation. The way Canada
Oh,
tax income up is much different than the Americans.
yes,
I've experienced both, and that'll be an eye opener.
yes.
The other thing that's kind of changed over the last, I'd say, 5 years in particular, is the access to healthcare north of the border, depending on where you want to move to. I
Yes.
would hesitate. I would. I've had a conversation literally within the last 2 weeks with a client of mine who is a dual citizen who's thinking of relocating back to Canada, and I asked him, "Where are you thinking of moving to?" And I would be very cautious about moving to a secluded rural part of the country if you're of, say, my vintage or older, because you may have difficulty getting access to healthcare. In fact, one of my clients did move back to the East Coast here about a year and a half ago, and when he called I guess it's called the equivalent of OHIP, the provincial healthcare, and got his registration, got his card, and all of that. And he asked him when he would be assigned a doctor, and the person on the other line, without any inflection in their voice, said, "Oh, 5 to 10 years." There are some things to think about. If you're moving to, if you're able to move to Toronto or Vancouver, or a large Canadian population, that's not going to be so much of an issue. But if you're looking to maybe move to a bit more of a rural part of the country, that's something you want to think about. It also, there are things that we have in the U.S. that, like long-term care insurance. I'll tell you one thing I would do if I'm moving to Canada. I would want to purchase long-term care insurance before I moved, change my residency, for example. I'm just giving a few just things I would think about. And to your point, I thought what you said was perfect. He's like, is this about, if it's just simply because of one person in the White House that's going to be there for no more than 4 years, I think maybe think about twice. That would be my take. And the idea of, buying a property, if you want to spend more time in Canada, that's a great option perhaps. But anyway, every case is unique, right, Catherine?
It frankly is a nice segue into what you want to chat about next.
Yes. You know what? One of the things I warn about all the time is do it yourself. Do it yourself investing, do it yourself tax planning, do it yourself estate planning. And I could go on and on and on. And I warn it, I tell you right now, I can't even imagine. I've gone through the process myself. I can't even imagine what do-it-yourself immigration strategies would look like. So the first thing I think what we should do before we wrap up here, you've been talking a lot about the pain points and things that people have to consider, but what can you share about the benefits of retaining, a professional licensed immigration attorney in this whole process, coming to you with an idea, and beyond that, I think one other question I'd like to ask, and you can combine them together, is the common mistakes or omissions that you see. I'd like to first of all, the benefits, and then what are some of the things that you see that do-it-yourselfers do that end up derailing their plans?
Well, do it yourself. That's very interesting because the Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada website actually promotes people being able to navigate the system on their own. And it has been like that for years. And yet you cannot reach a human being. An officer will not evaluate your circumstances and give you any recommendation. Their approach is to put as much information on the website, which they think is clear as day, and most people find as clear as mud. And then if they make a mistake, they're stuck. So, I see people coming to me all the time. You asked about what are the mistakes that people make. They don't write a letter of reference that's in accordance with the NOC code because they don't know what the NOC code is.
Never heard of it, probably.
They've never heard of it. So the places where people make mistakes is, well, we filled in the forms and we sent them in. Isn't that good enough? I always say the application forms are kind of like the skeleton, and everything else you send along with an application is the flesh that turns it into, a real person, a real living thing. So I think it's very sound advice, and more so than ever, simply because Canada's immigration program is in such a state of change. The things that existed before do not exist today. Canada's investor program, you were talking about the EB5, Canada's investor program got suspended in 2012 and frozen in 2014. We don't have one. And I still get people asking me, can I come in as an investor? They're not really aware of other programs like the startup visa program. So you need to become familiar with the lay of the land. And you can save yourself a lot of time and energy if you consult with a competent professional. And I would urge you to get letters of reference. In Canada, there are two kinds of representatives for immigration matters. There are immigration lawyers and there are immigration consultants. There are about 2,000 or 3,000 immigration consultants, and there are somewhere between 12,000 and 15,000, immigration lawyers, 2,000 to 3,000, and there are 12,000 to 15,000 immigration consultants. And I can tell you their training does not compare to that of lawyers.
How are they regulated? Are they regulated?
They are regulated. They have their own regulatory body. It's the third regulatory body in about 10 or 12 years, so I can't even remember the acronym for it. And there are good immigration consultants. Don't get me wrong. I teach a lot of courses to immigration consultants. And there are bad immigration lawyers. There are immigration lawyers that I know that are in jail at the moment. So when you are really, when you're working with any professional, do your homework, check their reputation, get some references, find out who you're working with. The other mistake that I see people make is that if they do work with a professional, they think that the professional's just doing everything and they don't have to be involved in the process. And that's a big mistake.
Yes.
That's a big mistake. So I think having a professional involved in your immigration journey is important, more so than ever. You need the key word that we use in everything. I write a lot of blogs, and I've been using the word strategy more than any other word in what we've been writing about, because the path is not straightforward the way that it used to be. And you need to be familiar, and you're not going to become familiar. Let's be serious. A person is not going to become an immigration specialist. You're not going to read the immigration website for 3 years to figure it all out. You need to know what the different programs are, and you're not going to know what those programs are. Somebody told me there was something like 63 different programs to obtain permanent residence by. This would have been about 6 or 8 months ago. And that's a combination of our federal programs and our provincial programs. So it's a complex process, and you would benefit from advice if this is what you would like to achieve for yourself and your family.
Okay, I have one additional wrap up, just clarification.
Okay.
The time you talked about strategy, which is really what provoked this. Those who fail to plan to fail. We both know that's true.
Yeah.
The timing, well, the expectations here. How long, it isn't on our list of questions, but how long is this going to take? You can use any of the above examples that we've outlined in terms of why people won't want to, like, what are we talking about here, realistically speaking?
The timing for every process is really different. If we've got an American citizen or Canadian citizen sponsoring their U.S. citizen spouse, I always tell them to budget somewhere between 12 and 24 months.
Really?
I have seen things speed up dramatically where people are being improved as quickly as 6 months, but I always tell people, be prepared. It's going to be between 12 and 24 months. And if you get approved, you can always just come to Canada, become a permanent resident. Now you've got your paperwork, and then you can go home and put your affairs in order and move at your own pace. But, I just came back from a business trip to India where I met with students at a university. And these students would graduate from high school in India, come and take a 2-year diploma program or a 4-year diploma program, get a 3-year work permit, and then apply for permanent residence. So it was really like a 5-year plan, a 6-year plan. Now I'm telling them to prepare for a 10 to 12-year plan, because you cannot qualify for immigration without probably a master's program. So the way that students have done it for decades really is no longer the way to go, because they just won't qualify. They won't get the points. And that's really just an example that underscores what I was saying on the previous question is professional advice is worth it. Figure out what are your options? How are you going to qualify? The way your brother did it, or your neighbor did it, or your cousin did it is probably not the way that you are going to be able to do it. So you need to have an option tailored to your circumstances.
You know, I'm gonna set you free here. You've been such a great guest.
Thank you.
I have a bunch of other questions, but I'm going to defer till we will clearly have to have you back again here. Okay, so as you probably know, we have people watching and listening all over the United States and Canada. We've got people watching on our website, and for those folks, they can see your contact information plain as day. But for those that are listening, could you share with us what is the best way? Because I bet you we've provoked a few people here today. What is the best way for them to contact you? How would you like them to reach out to you?
Well, I'm old fashioned, so a phone number is always good. Calling the office, and I still have a real live human being person that answers the phone and says hello to you. And email is also great. Email and telephone.
So what's the phone number you would like us to recommend?
604-689-5444. That is the office line.
Easy to remember.
Right.
And they can email you at Catherine at SAS. What is it? You better.
Sas and Ing. SASANDING.com.
Perfect. Well, listen, Catherine, I'm so happy you made yourself available for this. It was great to see you, and you provide so much great information for us today. Can't wait to have you back again.
Thanks, Wayne. It's been my pleasure.
Catherine
nice to
Sas, thank you. Catherine Sas is a Canadian-based immigration attorney with Sas and Ing Barristers and Solicitors, and she provides, as you can tell, a full range of immigration services, and she is consistently recognized as a leading immigration practitioner, and indeed she is. Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne.
I look forward to bringing you the 3 Question Podcast, and I hope you find them educational and informative. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our podcast and YouTube channels. And to receive notification when our latest episode has been posted, please click on the notifications bell. Last but not least, to schedule an online Zoom consultation with me to discuss your wealth management needs, please click on the link in the description box below, www.onecapital.com/meet with Wayne. Thank you, and we will see you soon.